ERP vendor audits are a major source of revenue for vendors. How do you survive an ERP vendor audit? What are some strategies for getting through it? That's what I want to talk about today. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney. For the last 20 years, I've drafted and negotiated a variety of technology-related contracts and litigated failed digital transformations in courts across the country. ERP audits are not random at all. If you're the victim of an ERP vendor audit, there's a high likelihood that the vendor thinks there's a revenue opportunity with your utilization of that software. In our experience, ERP vendors take advantage of ambiguous terms in the contract to their advantage. They will make ERP vendor audits more difficult and more expensive than necessary. And really, they have no incentive to be accurate in the way that they calculate your usage of the software or the methodology that they use to determine how much revenue you owe them. How do you push back? How do you deal with an aggressive vendor that has an aggressive audit process that is demanding additional revenue from you because you're out of compliance allegedly with that contract? Well, I think the first thing that you are going to want to do is realize that this process can be contentious. They could potentially be requesting millions of dollars from you, and you really need to have a game plan in place to deal with this aggressive audit stance by companies like SAP or Oracle or whoever your ERP vendor is. And I think the first step that you're going to want to do is get an understanding of the lay of the land. And what I mean by that is, I think it's imperative that you perform your own audit using your own methodology. And I'm not recommending that you come up with some kind of abstract methodology for determining compliance and determining whether you're utilizing that software in compliance with that contract. That methodology has to be sound, and it needs to be based in the contractual framework that you're dealing with. You have to have an understanding of what's the license metric. Are you allowed to access that software on a user basis? Are you utilizing a site license, a revenue model? Whatever that license metric is, you have to have an understanding of how your usage of the software is being calculated and the methodology for calculating whatever money that vendor is going to assert you owe. And I think by getting an understanding of what your baseline is that's reasonably derived from the contractual framework that you're dealing with, you're really setting yourself up for success. And what you're doing is, you're going to be able to push back on any kind of argument made by that vendor that you're not in compliance. You're going to be able to show them, hey, this is what the license metric says. This is how we are calculating our usage of the software, and this is where we come out. And I can virtually guarantee that if they're saying that you owe them $1 million, that your calculation, the methodology that you've used being reasonable, reasonably derived from that contractual framework that you're dealing with, is going to be much less. There's going to be a huge delta between what they say you owe and what maybe you actually reasonably calculate that you might owe them. So I think first is get an understanding of what you're in for, what you've done, what they can reasonably assert, and what they can't reasonably assert. When you are presented with their audit report, I think you've got to look at that thing with a jaundiced eye. You've got to hold that thing up in the air like it's a plague, essentially, and really take a hard look at it. I will guarantee you that it is not accurate, that it has not been presented in a way that is to your benefit. It is one-sided, it is unreasonable, and the methodology by which they're going to calculate revenue is going to be, it might have some kind of loose relation to what's actually in the contract. But again, they're going to take advantage of any ambiguity in that contract to your disadvantage and to their advantage. They're going to charge you as much money as they potentially can. And the reason that they do this, to be quite honest with you, and this is having been on the other side and seeing how these things are done, if somebody needs to make their year-end numbers, somebody wants to get a bonus, it's quarter end, whatever it is, there's a sales VP that is $1 million short of his number, and they're going to go through and look at any kind of unusual activity. A lot of these things are done remotely, and so they'll have an understanding of what you're licensed for and where you're coming out. And if they can make a reasonable argument that you owe them money, they're going to do it. And it can be very, very difficult to push back on these kinds of allegations. So I think, having the baseline understanding by conducting your own audit really is critical. And the goal coming out of this is, have an understanding of what I think my usage is, have an understanding of how they're calculating what they think my usage is, and then use that data to your advantage to try to negotiate some sort of a resolution to this that's going to be much less than what they're actually asserting that you owe, right? I mean, whatever, if it's $1 million and you're at 100, I mean, you want to get to, closer to 100 than you want to get to 1 million. And I think you can do that successfully if you're armed with the right kind of information and you've got the right approach to this and you have a plan. And so once you do that, I think it's going to be imperative as you're talking about, settling this dispute, it's going to be imperative upon you to look at that contractual language, figure out where the ambiguity is or where the misstep on your part was, and try to, I wouldn't say renegotiate the contract, but get some kind of clarity associated with what the actual usage rights in that agreement are, and to the extent you can put an amendment in place or some kind of an order form that clarifies what the usage rights are, you're going to be in a better position going forward, because what you don't want to do is have to deal with this on a recurring basis, right? You want to fix the problem, you want to move on, and I think really, to be quite honest with you, vendors are really, they're incented to try to resolve this with you. I think the number that they come at you with first is probably not a realistic number. It's really for the purposes of trying to negotiate a resolution. They're going to come at 2 million knowing really that, it's 250,000 or something like that. And you need to get down to that lower number as soon as you can, through, some sort of a negotiated settlement that, the end result being, some sort of an order form for whatever additional licenses or software or functionality that you need that also addresses and fixes the ambiguity within that contract. I think it's unlikely that, this is going to end up in litigation, but, depending on how contentious it is and depending on the amount that they say that they are owed, it probably makes a lot of sense for you to engage a law firm or a lawyer that is familiar with these types of tactics and can represent you and your interest as you negotiate a resolution to whatever they're claiming that you owe. Software audits are stressful. They happen frequently. They are a big deal. And you really have to have a game plan for dealing with it. And you should not be going alone if you're dealing with a software audit from an aggressive vendor. If you have any questions about anything that I've talked about in this video, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you. You can reach us at taftlaw.com. Processes you can go through. Yeah.